Welcome back to our panel discussion, American Readiness, Technological Innovation in Energy and Fuel, sponsored by Honeywell, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Joseph Bryan, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Roberto Guerrero, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Operational Energy, Mark Carell, he is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Environment, Safety and Infrastructure, the Honorable Catherine Hammack is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy and Environment, and Kerry Smith is President of the Defense and Space Strategic Business Unit of Honeywell Aerospace. And Kerry, before the break we were talking about energy performance savings contracts, and I was curious to how they look from the industry side. What do you have to put behind them, behind the piece of paper, to make sure that everybody's happy?
Yes, so we're very excited about our energy savings performance contracts, and we're one of the primary providers of those to all the military services. What we try and do, as Catherine described earlier, is we line up third-party financing, and we do modeling that basically figures out how much energy savings we're going to be able to accomplish over what period of time, and then we're paid back over that period of time based upon how much savings that we realize. From a Honeywell perspective, we're actually involved in 5,700 energy savings performance contracts, which is quite a bit, and saving over $6 billion in energy savings to the services. Again, substantial. For the federal government, we save over $1.5 billion in energy savings. This spans across 250 task orders, 140 sites. Two that we're particularly proud of is for the Army. We're doing the largest energy savings performance contract, which is at Fort Bragg. We also have another large one that's at Rock Island. And then we're also doing the Air Force's largest contract at Tinker Air Force Base.
Wow, so these are for installations, buildings, contracts for fuel and or keeping them warm and air conditioned and lit.
That's correct, and the key is, I think, and from a Honeywell perspective, what we're really excited about is being involved in both process and production facilities. And that's a unique position that we play in, largely because we have such experience in performance-based logistics efforts. So we do understand the processes that occur and how to make those more efficient.
And what are the elements that go into fulfilling the contract? That is to say, some of the installations are building their own generating capacity, their own distribution, the grid, if you will. That's different from what you might do with respect to a utility that you're continuing to use, and different thermostats and windows and so forth to make the buildings more efficient. There's a broad range of parts and pieces, it seems, to each one of these.
Yes, it's very diverse, as you're indicating, and so the key is to figure out how you can maximize savings across all those diverse areas.
So you have to know where and when you use energy first. So if you figure out what your biggest energy consumer is, for instance, Rock Island, like you talked about, it's in the industrial processes.
That's
then
the
you
arsenal.
It is. It's an arsenal, and it's in Rock Island, which is partway between Iowa and Illinois on an island. And what they do...
I didn't know there was water between those two
places. There is water, and there's bridges. That makes it even more interesting. But when you figure out what your processes are that use the most amount of energy, then you can sit down together and figure out how you can find solutions that use less energy overall. And so you develop a scope of work for each project. And you're right, it covers things from windows and walls and roofs to lighting, air conditioning. We have done wind turbines and solar photovoltaics, combined heat and power, and industrial process improvement. So it's a wide range of things. The legislation that allows us to enter into these contracts just says it's got to save energy.
I imagine it also must translate down to maybe changes in process and the way people operate.
It can. It can change processes, especially in the industrial world, but in the building world, it doesn't necessarily change anything. The work might be done over the weekend, and you come in and there's new light fixtures, new lighting, new exterior lighting, or an air conditioning system's been replaced. Maybe it was an old one at the end of its life, and now it's a brand new one. One of the things that we like most with the energy saving performance contract is when you bundle several things together. So if you put in more efficient windows, better insulation, and a better roof, and new lighting, you can then size down your air conditioning system. So you can replace it with a smaller one, which not only is more efficient, but it uses less energy because it's smaller. And when you bundle these together, you have a net better solution.
We've come a long way since switches that had labels on them that say turn the lights off when you leave. I guess that.
Well, we still have some
We
of
still
those.
have those too.
That's right.
And
This is the importance of partnerships
Yeah.
with industry and with academia and others. The energy industry, it's really interesting. We're at a fascinating time for energy because things are changing so quickly. Not just energy technologies, but energy technologies that are enabled by tremendous advances in data analytics, for example, which allow us to know a lot better and understand a lot better how it is that we're using energy and how we can do it better and how we can distribute energy in times of crisis to our most critical assets and facilities. So we're at a really interesting time, and one of the reasons why partnerships are so important at this particular time is with things changing so fast. I think as Catherine mentioned earlier, energy is something we do really well at some places, but it's not the core competency of the military. That's not really our main job. And so when you can bring in partners who really do have that as a core competency and can work with you to identify opportunities for you to get better and to improve their mission performance, that's really important. And I think we're doing, like you said, we're way beyond switches. We're into microgrids, and we're into solar panels and distributed energy and fuel cells and all kinds of advanced controls that are enabling us to do things we never thought would have been possible, and for us to manage our operations much more efficiently if we use them right and we take good advice. So partnerships are actually critical for us to take advantage of some of the changes in technology that we're seeing and the opportunities that are right there for us.
And to follow up on what Joe said, the OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense, has put in place a program that's called ESTCP, which is the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program. And what it is, it permits competitions on various energy savings technologies. And that will eventually lead its way into the energy savings performance contracts that we were discussing. But I think the Office of Secretary of Defense and the Armed Services are really paving the way.
Okay, I want to switch gears here because behind all uses of energy at some point is fuel. And there's a lot of ferment, no pun intended, going on in the whole world of fuel and on ships, on planes, on tanks, and in regular cars and trucks and vehicles that are used, routinely throughout the military. So let's talk about fuels and what's happening in alternative fuels and how the savings are calculated there. Is it just a matter of burning less, or is it a matter of much cheaper for the same burn rate? Why don't we start with the Navy?
So I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, and the question is, why are we looking at alternative fuels? Why do we care about this? Why does it matter? And I think the answer to that, again, it's mission related. We have a private sector that's moving very quickly to diversify the commercial fuel supply chain. There's companies like UPS, United, Cathay Pacific, even at Disney, at the Magic Kingdom, they drive their buses on renewable diesel fuel. So in order for us to maintain interoperability with the private sector and to ensure that our plane isn't sitting on a tarmac somewhere next to a United Airlines tank of fuel and can't get up in the air because we didn't have the foresight to test that fuel to make sure it worked on our planes, we have to have an aggressive program to test and certify and qualify alternative fuels for use by the military services. Similarly, more fuel from more sources, from more places in the world means more operational flexibility for our combatant commanders. That's critical. You don't want to be stuck someplace in the world without access to fuel, because the bottom line is we still need liquid fuels to do our job. So the question is, what are we doing? What's the Navy doing? We have an aggressive test and qualification program for alternative fuels that's run up at Pax River. What they do is they test and certify fuels, biofuels and other alternative fuel blends to make sure that they're going to work, and to make sure they're going to work on our planes and our ships, and to make sure that they're compatible with our supply chains. And once those fuels are tested and qualified, they're allowed to compete. And that's sort of the American way, right? If you prove that you can do the job, you have an opportunity to compete. We don't have a requirement, none of the services have a requirement to buy these fuels at any price, even if they're going to work. Once you're allowed to compete, you have to be price competitive. And we have a process through which the services buy fuel through the Defense Logistics Agency, where now we've qualified a couple of fuels, and now those people who make those fuels can say, hey, I want to bid into that contract to supply the military with fuel. And that's a good thing. That's sort of the way the system's supposed to work. All the services have...
Yeah, let's go to Roberto.
Yeah.
You've got a $7 or $8 billion fuel bill every year for the liquids that make the airplanes fly. Do you have an algae-powered fighter yet?
No, we don't. But what we have done is the two processes that produce alternate fuels, to include fuels that are used off of bio products, are hydro-renewable jet, and the other one's called Fischer-Tropsch. They're the most popular and the ones that are being used in the commercial sector at a small scale right now. But as they grow, one of our priorities, and it goes really to what Joe was talking about with respect to being able to deliver the mission wherever or whenever, we have this thing we call a sure supply. So on top of the biofuels that we've tested on all of our aircraft, we additionally added alcohol to jet to one of our aircraft, because that would be the next one that would be in line. So we want to be able to use these fuels wherever they may be available when we need them. And as well as we've also made a transition in the United States, and that will start happening in the Pacific here, which is that there are other commercially available fuels such as Jet A. Right now we used to rely specifically on JP8, a mil-spec fuel. Jet A is very similar, can be adapted to perform just like JP8 with some additives, and we've done that as well to make sure that we have the maximum flexibility to be able to deliver the mission wherever and whenever.
Flexibility, is it also performance in any way or cost?
Typically, the performance won't be too much different between any of the different.
Such thing as high octane.
At least in the aircraft itself, typically the performance is the same, and that's key to us because we don't want to go somewhere and have a degraded performance when we're trying to not make it a fair fight. Yeah.
Got it.
Well, we're working on engines that can use some of the advanced features of these fuels. Some of these fuels would allow you to run at a lower temperature if the engine were designed for that. So we're working on a new engine for our helicopters that's designed to take advantage of some of these fuels. It's going to require 35% less maintenance and use 25% less fuel. So those are real capabilities that it's returning to the force. You can fly longer, you can fly higher, and you can have longer maintenance intervals. Those are real mission enhancements, but they're also cost savings. So it's sort of a win-win both areas.
Okay, and Carrie, I guess Honeywell's in the liquid fuel business to some extent also.
Yes, we've been very involved. In fact, we work with all the services. We're involved in the development, the production, the qualification, the certification of biofuels. We've been an active participant in the U.S. Navy's Green Fleet Initiative as one example. And I think what differentiates Honeywell from a biofuel perspective is that we're the only company that is able to both develop and produce renewable fuels as well as test and certify those fuels. So we play on both sides.
Okay, and I just wanted to go into the weeds here a little bit, which I think it was President Bush coined, or that administration coined the phrase energy zombies, I think it was, or vampires. All the little things that consume energy that we tend to overlook because they're so small, but they add up to really big users of energy. And on aircraft, the auxiliary power unit, what they used to call the putt-putt, decades ago, things like that. Do you look at those small users of energy that are not big individually like a whole airplane, but add up to a lot of consumption?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I'll just speak in one case, which is really operationally relevant, and that is deployed Marines. So our forward deployed Marines, when they're out conducting a mission, are now their energy demand to run small radios and telephones and communications equipment. Each of those trickle charges takes energy, right? And where do you get that energy from? And one of the ways we've gotten energy in the past is by running generators that provide electricity, that power those batteries, that power those devices. But those generators take fuel, and those fuels take trucks. And those trucks drive down really dangerous roads in places like Afghanistan, and that's where people get shot and killed, and we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to take those trucks off the road. So we're very focused at the very forwardmost point, at the most expeditionary point, at reducing those very, very small loads, because a very, very small load can help us take a Marine or a soldier or sailor off the road and reduce the chance of them coming into harm's way. So trickle charges aren't just important because you leave your computer on at night, they're important to a deployed Marine. And so I think we need to understand why is it that we're focused on energy? It's because we want to make them more successful and more safe.
Well, the Army and Marines partner together, and we've developed solar blankets that you can spread out. It folds up into a very small size. You can stick it in your rucksack, but you can unfold it when you stop and take a break, and you can trickle recharge stuff because we've developed equipment that doesn't consume as much energy. And so I saw one guy carrying it. He was like wearing it as a cape and pinned it onto the back of his rucksack. So he was recharging things as he was walking out on a mission. So we're making everything much more efficient so that we can fight longer, we can go farther, and we can use less. You know, the weight is another thing for the Marines and the Army, because you used to carry extra batteries. Now you don't have to carry those extra batteries because you can recharge everything on the go.
All right, good place to take a break. Afterwards, we're going to talk about some of the engine technologies that affect all of the armed services. Our guests today are Mark Carell. He's Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Environment, Safety, and Infrastructure. Roberto Guerrero is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Operational Energy. Joseph Bryan is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy. Catherine Hammock is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment. And Carrie Smith is President of the Defense and Space Strategic Business Unit of Honeywell Aerospace. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is American Readiness, Technological Innovation in Energy and Fuel, sponsored by Honeywell here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.